All right, I'm starting.
All right. You can tell them about the hot chocolate if they've just walked in. You can just tell them.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, to Spirit of Health. There is hot chocolate and hot tea in the back, and we can get water if anybody needs it. How is everything so far? How are the desserts? Pretty good? Okay, cool. Well, I want to, of course, Jen's going to talk in a little bit. She asked me to start and to talk about sugar. So you'll probably get a little bit of different angle from me than you might have got from my wife, but it's her fault because she asked me to talk. So, so I always love to share understanding of health and nutrition related to biblical principles. And so I'm going to do that this morning. I'm going to share some things with you that are truthful things that I think is really important in understanding the day and the times that we live in, especially related to nutrition and kind of what's going on with the health of our society today. So even though we want to have fun in this class and enjoy, sugar and healthy alternatives, we want to also give you the truth. So thank you to Jen, who did so much work in setting all this up and making everything, and Summer Winger is amazing. She is just such a blessing to us, and we could not offer this without her. Let's just say that it's stressful enough with her, let alone without her. So it would not have happened. And we're excited about what's going on in the back because we're going to have more room, more space, be able to do larger classes and more of these types of events. So a couple of upcoming events, not this Friday, but next Friday, which is December 9th, is our Christmas party. And it's open to the public. It's just an appreciation to everyone who supports us in the community. It's a way for us to just give back. There's live music. Krista Bowker, she's an amazingly talented musician. She was here last year, so there are going to be some violin and what does she play? Flute, and it's just really neat. And we'll have food, of course,
again.
Again.
Little orchestra.
Yeah, she has her own little orchestra.
All on her computer.
We'll have food, and we will have lots of raffle prizes. We're going to do a raffle every hour. And we're going to do 3 prizes every hour, a small, medium, and large prize, like every hour. And so it's from 4 to 7. Last year we did 4 to 6, and it was just, there's so many people, and it was so much fun. We're like, let's do 4 to 7 this year. So it's Friday the 9th, 4 to 7 p.m. That's our Christmas party. So really welcome. You guys just show up here. That's all you got to do is show up.
Anytime between then, come and go.
Cookbook release. So did a lot of you see the free downloaded version? Did any of you guys get that? Okay, quite a few of you. Cool. So there's going to be a printed version that we're hoping to have at the soonest a week, but within 2 weeks. And we want to have that available for purchase for you guys to buy for your family, for Christmas gifts, for whatever you'd want to purchase it for. There's 50 recipes instead of the 20. And it's going to be in a nice spiral bound book so that you can leave it open. You ever get one of those cookbooks that has a hard bind and you got to stick something in it to keep it open? So or you have to break the seal. Right. See, you're all like, I know what you're talking about. So, yeah, we're excited about that. And do we have a little sign up for that? I thought we did.
I think, Hannah, is there a sign up on the register?
Okay. So if you want to get the cookbook, we're kind of doing a sign up, not a pre-order thing, but
just sign up to let us know and we'll call you when it gets in.
Yeah, we'll call you when it gets in. And then I mentioned the building expansion. A lot of you guys kind of know what's going on there. They're hoping to be done with construction within the month. He said by Christmas. It's going to take us another, 6 weeks, whatever-ish, to paint and to do flooring and to decorate and to make it all purty. And then that'll be going. And then after that's done, then we're going to start doing the juice bar and the cafe over here. We're going to tear out that wall between those 2 offices, and that whole strip along the side is going to be a cafe, and we're going to build a big patio out to the side as well. So that's just the plans for next year. That's the small plans. We're hoping there's larger plans in the future. I'm doing that so my wife cringes because I'm a million miles an hour. I'm the visionary. So she has to do all the details.
Let's
so.
just get through today.
Yeah, exactly. Just get through the class today.
Just get through the poopy diapers and the
Yes. All right, so I'm going to talk about sugar with you guys, and I think this is a hugely important topic because, like I said, we want to enjoy the good things that God gave us, but we don't want anything to become an idol. We don't want anything to destroy us. We don't want anything to be exalted over the God who created us. And food is one thing that is exalted over God that nobody talks about, that the church doesn't talk about. And I could probably argue that it's the most destructive force in the church today and killing the most people and bringing the most people short of the fullness of their calling and their lives. Who's dying of old age today? People are dying of sickness and disease. So I kind of laid the hammer right on the first sentence, but I want to preach the truth to you guys. You know, just like the Zadok priesthood, they gave the truth to the people. And so again, we want you to understand the good things of God, but we don't want it to hinder your walk with God. Does that make sense? Okay, so the first thing is that God gave us sweet, right? We have a sweet taste bud in our mouth. We have other taste buds in our mouth. Did you guys know that? Not just sweet? I'm joking. But there's bitter, and there's sour, and there's pungent, and there's salty, and there's taste. Like God's a God of taste and design, and we're designed in His image. So there's something important about the sweet taste. And there's nothing wrong with sweet things. And God gave us sweet things, but we have to choose the right things. And just like with anything, the enemy takes the good things of God and twists them to destroy mankind, right? And that's what he's done with sweet, and that's what he's done with food. And so we want to understand that so that we don't fall victim to what the enemy is doing. We want to walk in alignment with what God gave us and how we're supposed to live based on God's creation and design. So I'm going to give you 3 scriptures. I was just praying about this morning. I'm like, Lord, give me some scriptures. And so I'm going to give you 3 references out of hundreds related to health and nutrition and sweet. And if you look in the Bible, they talk about sweet. He talks about bitter. Jeremiah talks a lot about bitter. All these tastes and different things are discussed in the Bible. But the first thing I want to bring up, I think that the Lord highlighted to me, was the Nazirite vow, which is in Numbers 6. And one of the 3 main stipulations of the Nazirite vow was that they would choose nothing of the grape or anything associated with grapes. And the reason that was part of the Nazirite vow back then is because the grape was their sweet. They didn't have processed food. They didn't have big factories making all this white flour, white sugar, all this stuff. Their sweet was mainly grapes and raisins and raisin cakes and wine and right? I mean, it was things of the grape that were the sweet things. And so when somebody made a Nazirite vow, it wasn't because grapes are bad, evil things, right? God created grapes. Grapes aren't bad. You know, wine isn't necessarily bad if we're not using it to excess and causing drunkenness, right? We know that. So the reason they gave up the grapes was they were saying that I will give up the good things of the world, even the good things of the world that God gave us, in pursuit of you, over even good things of the world. And so that's what I want people to understand, is when we're changing our ways from eating processed sugar and eating healthier sugars, or even to abstaining at all from sugar, it's because we're choosing that God is more important than food, that God is more important than sweet things. And so I just want to make that clear, because it wasn't a legalistic thing. You know, we can get legalistic when it comes to vows and avoiding certain things and this and that. It's a heart posture. And what they were doing with the Nazirite vow is making a heart posture that for a specific period of time, I'm going to give up even good things that you made, God, because I want to focus my eyes fully on you and you alone. Does that make sense? Okay, the second thing, I'm going to give you a Psalm 119, 103, which says, "How sweet are your words to my taste, yes, sweeter than honey to my mouth." And so again, you know, God gave us sweet. This is David, right? He's the psalmist. He clearly knew what honey was. He clearly knew what sweet things were. But he also made it clear to share with us that the words of God are sweeter to him than honey in his mouth. And so I want us to have that perspective too. When we're going to holiday functions or birthday parties or whatever the event is, we're all guilty of this. I mean, my whole life I couldn't wait to go to XYZ event or Christmas. Why? Because of the food. It was about the food. It's about the sweets. You know, the 5-year-old kid can't wait till his birthday party because he knows he's going to get cupcakes and muffins and who knows what else. So, again, what's our perspective on what's important in this world? Food is important for fellowship, for communion, for getting together. But is your first focus God? Is your first focus your friends, your family, fellowship, loving your neighbors and your fellow friends? I can't wait to talk to my aunt who doesn't know the truth about Jesus Christ, and it's an opportunity for me to talk to her and share her the truth. Or is it like, I just can't wait to go eat? And you stuff yourself so full, and then you can barely move or walk, and then you can't talk to anybody because you just want to sit in front of the TV and zone out after the meal. Like, we've all done it. We've all done it. Well, maybe not all of us. I know I have many times. So again, I'm just sharing with you that, it's okay to have sweet things, but they can't exalt God's purposes for us in our lives. And that's unfortunately what's happened in food with a lot of us. The final scripture I'm going to give you is in Proverbs. And it says, a sated man, which would be like a satiated man, or like a fully, a fully satisfied man or woman, person. A sated man loathes honey, but a famished man, any bitter thing is sweet. So who here knows what it's like to starve? We don't know what it's like to be hungry. We don't really. We're driven by appetite. And so we're so into the good things of this world that we don't know what it's like to have need or to be hungry or to be starving. And so for a person who's truly hungry, it doesn't matter what they eat. They're not going to the store to buy the sweetest, most perfect thing that tastes the absolute best. They're just wanting to eat. And so again, I think that's important perspective to have, that we're so focused on everything having this perfect taste and flavor and sweetness and all that, when, again, that's not the most important thing in life.
Proverbs what? Which proverb?
I didn't write down the scripture on that Proverbs one, but you can look it up. I don't remember. But a sated man loathes honey, but to a famished man, any bitter thing is sweet. So in other words, if you're truly hungry, all things will taste good to you. Bitter things will taste good to you. You'll have a wide palate and a range of tasteful things. If all you can think about and all you want is sweet, there's something wrong. There's something wrong in your body physically. There might be something wrong emotionally, because a lot of times we eat for emotional fulfillment. And so we just really want to check our hearts when it comes to food and what we're doing, and what is the reason why we're doing the things we're doing. Are we eating to honor God, or are we eating to just please ourselves? Because the goal is to serve and love other people, and so many people have eaten themselves into a position, they cannot serve God. They cannot serve other people. They're reliant on doctors and medicine and hospitals and hospital bills and pharmaceutical drugs, and they can hardly walk and move. It was not God's purpose or intention for any of us. And the reason I'm sharing that with you is because I think one of the biggest downfalls to people is sweet. It's that sweet taste. But again, it's not supposed to be bad or wicked or evil, because God gave that to us. But it's supposed to be enjoyed in alignment with God's heart. Is that fair? Okay, so reasons man-made processed sugar has ruined our health. I'm going to reference Weston A. Price, Dr. Royal Lee, Dr. Francis Pottinger, because these were three guys back in the 1930s, in the beginning of us processing our food. In other words, taking the original things God made and running them through machines to concentrate them or to strip nutrients out of them to increase shelf life so things didn't spoil. And at that time, they saw the degeneration happening in the 30s. Children born weaker, children born with misshapen jawlines and narrowing hips of women. They saw this taking place in 30s, and they wrote books and books and books about it. I mean, Dr. Roy Lee wrote a book this thick. Weston A. Price wrote a book called Nutrition and Physical Degeneration in the 30s. That if we continue to eat these devitalized processed foods, we will destroy ourselves. And that's what's happened. And it's no better now than it was then. In fact, it's worse now than it was then because we're so driven by taste. And again, if you want to look at it from a biblical standpoint, we're driven by our flesh. That's why God calls us to fast. If you fast and pray, you turn away from things of the flesh and you focus on the Spirit of God, the Spirit of God that's in you. But there's a lot of things that interfere with connecting with God. And believe it or not, food is one of those. And again, we just don't talk about it a lot. If you want to know your weaknesses, if you want to know how hooked you may or may not really be on sugar, fast. Don't eat it for a week. Don't eat it for a month. Don't eat it for 3 months. You know, if you really want to find out your weaknesses, if you really want to find out if something is an idol, you just fast from it. Whether it's Facebook or TV or whatever it is. But that's why God called us to fast. Because fasting turns us away from things of the world. Okay? So, those guys knew in the 30s that we were on a path towards destruction. And I've talked about it in my classes many times, that sickness and disease mainly, I don't want to say 100% of the time, but mainly is a misalignment with how God designed our bodies to function. And so, heavy, processed foods weren't designed by God to go in the human body. Even natural, healthy sweeteners weren't designed to be stuck in a gallon jar so you can go to the grocery store 24/7, grab it, and start glugging it into stuff. That's not normal. It's not natural. It never has been. Because if you lived based off God's design, you would only mainly have what for your sweet? Fruit? Honey? That's about it, right? Unless you happen to have maple trees and happen to know how to tap one and boil it and do all that, or you happen to have sugar cane, but that only grows in tropical regions. So why are we going to the grocery stores and buying bags of it? Because we can. Because of modern transportation. But I just want people to understand that it's not just about eating the healthier sugar.
The organic bag of sugar.
It's organic. Good, you know? I mean, that's the joke, right?
Yeah.
It's still concentrated. It's not in God's original form. It was never designed to go in the human body in that capacity. That's why it causes dysfunction. That's why it causes diabetes. That's why it causes arthritis. That's why it causes heart disease. And you can just go on down the list. We give these diseases to ourselves. We want to believe that it's something that we don't understand, or does genetics play a role? Sure it does. People are born weak, and we see that in our children today. But God is still God. He's the same yesterday, today, and forevermore. You can change and heal your body anytime because the power of the living God that's in us is a body that's designed as a self-healing mechanism. My joke is that all we got to do is get out of the way. If we can get out of the way of God, we'll fully heal and we'll fully regenerate. It doesn't matter if you have 4-stage cancer. You can heal from it, but you got to get out of the way of interfering with the way God designed your body to function. And sugar is one of the biggest things that interferes with the way God designed our body to function. Okay? So I wanted to stress that point that God has given us everything we need to satisfy our sweet in a healthy way. Fruit, mainly. Stevia is a sweet plant that God gave us that we grow stevia in our garden. You can pick it, you can chew the leaf, and it just happens to be sweet. It's just a plant that God gave us. Am I running out of time?
No, you're poking me in the eye.
Okay. I'm very animated. And honey. Those are the main things that we have, at our discretion, at our beck and call in a normal environment, if you're willing to fight off the bees and get honey, right? We did use maple syrup in quite a few of our things because it is a decent choice, and it is a very natural sweetener. But again, you can overdo anything. So, let's see, what did I not cover? Because I just kind of went off there.
It's okay. I think mainly just talking about the different concentrated forms and then giving them options. And then in fact, this is a good segue. Just if you look at your notes, you have a sheet that says a spectrum of whole food choices. And this is something I've been passing out the last few food classes, but it's like every time we do a food class, I keep going back to this chart because I keep feeling like it summarizes everything I want to say. So we have on the left-hand column, if you look at your spectrum here, you have dairy, greens, meat, fat, and sugar. And today we're really highlighting sugar, but we've used this whole chart in other classes that we've talked. And I just wanted to give you kind of a spectrum of like, no, you can stay. We'll wrap up in just a second, and then I'll start the sugars part. The left side of the column is the worst, and this would be everything processed and man-made. And so you've got your artificial sweeteners, you've got your genetically modified hydrogenated oils, your deep fried foods, your grain-fed hormone-filled meats, and then in sugar, mainly, you're going to have anything that's refined to the point of high concentration and is stripped of all minerals and everything, which would be your white and brown sugar, artificial sweeteners, and especially high fructose corn syrup, which I think a lot of people are aware of now is just extremely dangerous.
And now they call it corn syrup. They don't call it high fructose corn syrup. And there are hidden names for it so that you don't know what it is. So that's why you have to be cautious with packaged foods.
And then going to the right, you have a better option, which would be Rapadura is just basically like cane sugar, and the problem is, though, it's still very concentrated, so you're going to buy a bag of organic cane sugar, and if you just use it, liberally, you're still really putting burden on the body. Agave is processed in a way that it's pretty concentrated as well, although it's been touted as a health one, we actually do avoid that. Palm sugar is a little concentrated, although it's natural.
And cane sugar should be on that list. Rapadura is a type of cane sugar.
And so going to the right, we have the honey, maple syrup, and molasses would be kind of a nice, better option. And that's what we tend to, so this column here is where I tend to go to for celebrations. Mm-hmm. For my daughter's birthday, I'm going to use maple syrup and honey in her cupcakes, or, Christmas time, I'm going to go for those. Because to me, it's a one-time thing. It's not something we're going to eat throughout the week. It's a one-day meal. It's a celebration. I'm going to enjoy it with my family. And then for us, we live pretty much on the right-hand column. We just do fruit and stevia. We really don't do honey at all. Mm-hmm. I mostly sweeten with fruit. So bananas, dates is a fruit. I try not to do too much dried fruit. So I just wanted to give you a spectrum, and you can look at the other categories as well.
If it's okay, let me share two things with you guys, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jen, okay? One is I want people to understand why, let me start with this, why our world today is different than it used to be. I kind of mentioned that God created and designed things a certain way. One of my jokes is if you ever look at sugar cane, it's like a stick, okay? You can't overeat a stick, but you can run it through a machine, concentrate it down into a bag that big, and put cups into it. So again, not normal, right? But the other things that aren't normal about our society today is the 24/7, the transportation system, shipping stuff overseas, and so we have it in mass quantities. Our lifestyles aren't normal. The example I love to give people is Little House on the Prairie. Okay, Charles Ingalls, he went out in the morning, and from sun up to sundown, that guy worked his patootie off, right? He was doing a roof for this guy, and then he had to plow the field, and then he had to help this guy build a barn, and life was hard back then. And when he got home, and what was his wife? Carolyn, made a meal for him, and part of that meal was an apple pie. Not a big deal, because one, things weren't as processed back then, and two, Charles just burned, I don't know how many calories. It's not about calories, but he's sweating and he's working his butt off. Okay, now we're mainly sedentary. We're lucky to find 30 minutes to go work out. We don't live on farms. We don't live active lifestyles. We're not moving our lymph and our body and our digestion, and the metabolism is dropping because we're so sedentary. And on top of it, we're eating gobs and piles of white sugar and white flour and all this stuff. So our lifestyles are different. And the example I give people is when I don't love the idea of zoos and what they do to animals. However, you don't take a lion, out of the wild and put him in a zoo and be like, well, Doritos and Pop-Tarts are cheap, let's just give him those. You just killed the lion. And why? Because God didn't design a lion to eat those foods. You know what? God didn't design you to eat those foods either. And if you eat those foods, you're destroying the temple. 1 Corinthians 3:16. Not a fun chapter. I don't hear a lot of people preach on it, but read 1 Corinthians 3:16. God says if anyone's going to destroy the temple, he'll destroy them. So this is really serious stuff to God, like what we eat and how we treat our bodies. And we don't do it to our plants. You don't put diet soda on your plant and expect it to live. You kill the plant. So we can't put these things in our bodies and expect great health and longevity and freedom from sickness and disease. So I hope I stressed that enough. And the last point I just want to make is that different sugars work differently in the body. And I think this is really important for people to understand. Fruit is a simple sugar. Okay? When it goes into the body, it's easily assimilated. It's energy to the cells. It's quick in, it's quick out. There's nutrients in it. And that's a great way to get fuel and energy. And a lot of people just fast on fruit. We've had a lot of people do fruit fasts and get great healings in their bodies. Okay, it's a simple sugar. It's not as hard on the body. When you get into even natural sweeteners, honey, maple syrup, agave, and then when you get into all the grains, okay, all the breads and the pastas and the pizza and the crackers and the wheat and all that stuff, those are all complex sugars. So a simple sugar is a monosaccharide, one sugar molecule, versus a disaccharide, which is a multiple sugar molecule. When you put that in your body, it's harder on digestion. It requires an insulin response from the pancreas. It creates a lot of acidic waste byproduct that needs to be eliminated by your kidneys, and people have a lot of acid waste built up in their bodies, and their kidneys aren't working, and their lymphs congested. So this is not like a gluten thing. Oh, gluten-free, that's the answer to everything, okay? That, my gosh, that started in the 50s. That's a marketing thing more than anything. But grains and complex sugars are a problem because of the nature of the effort it takes for the body to break down, digest, and process them. That's why we encourage fruit over all of that stuff. If you're a diabetic, you're going to heal faster eating whole fruit if you stay away from all the breads and the pastas. And the American Diabetes Association tells you the opposite. Well, eat your bread, but make sure it's whole grain and blah, blah, blah. I mean, you want to be a diabetic the rest of your life? Follow the recommendations of the American Diabetes Association. Because that's what they want. They want you to be on their medication and be sick for your entire life. Yep. Sorry I threw that in there, but I'll end on that note. Okay, honey, there you go. Turn it over to you. Yes. Yes.
Like, so stevia that we buy at the store,
Uh-huh.
it's not, I mean, they concentrate it down, so it's not a naturally occurring reality.
Right.
What would you say to that?
Right. So I'll answer that question, then we're going to do Q&A at the end after Jen does her food demo. We have stevia in a powdered bulk form that's unprocessed. It's just straight stevia plant ground down that you can use that. The ones you buy in bottles are more concentrated. So yes, that's
They're like plant extracts.
It's like a plant extract. So yes, it is extracted. So it is more concentrated, but it's still way better than using all the other stuff. So even though it might not be perfectly natural in its plant form, original form, it's still going to be way better than using all the alternatives.
And I'll talk more about stevia in the next section. I'm actually going to do a whole little talk on stevia because I think that whole thing needs, people don't understand how to use it, and I'll talk about that.
Okay.
But basically, I like what
Cool.
Vaughn was just saying because I think the understanding of the complex sugars versus the simple sugars, that's why when you feed your kids donuts, they go crazy. I mean, it's like their body is just on overdrive. They're trying to deal with that huge influx of the complex sugars from the starch that they just ate, whether it's a donut or a cookie or whatever it was. Plus on top of it, it was deep fried oils or, so you're really, when you're working, when you're a mom and you've got kids, I mean, there's the regular behavior stuff that you got to work through, right? And then on top of that, throw all that onto their body and you're just making their life harder and your life harder. So, I really, especially with the families, the moms, the dads, I just really encourage you to think about, how you can veer away from the more complex sugars and get into things that are easy, quick to process for your kids and for yourself too, So let's get into talking about stevia a little bit. Actually, there was one little part Vaughn didn't talk about, but I did want to just mention is, so we have that spectrum food chart. And basically, sometimes there's going to be times where you're going to be looking at using the even better section. Actually, we did talk about this a little bit, but I'll just go through it one more time. So today, in the recipes that you had, we used maple syrup for one batch. We did one batch with the maple syrup of the brownies and one batch of the cheesecake with with the maple syrup, and then we did stevia for the other two. And so, for someone who is really struggling with candida yeast, diabetes, something that, they're just like, every time if I switch into sugar, I just get so many reoccurrences. It's not worth it for them. Stevia may be an acquired taste, but it's an option. It's a way to enjoy yourself a little bit on the holidays or in a celebration if you really have to be that strict. I personally find that I can combine stevia with my other natural sweeteners, and I don't taste the stevia flavor as much because it is a tad different. So stevia is a plant, and like Ty was saying, that's a really good question, because a lot of people are like, well, is stevia natural? Well, stevia is natural if you buy it in bulk in the form that we have it, but most people don't want to put that in their food because it tastes like an herb. It tastes kind of grassy. It has kind of an herb flavor. So if you're making cookies for your kids and they're a little green and they taste a little herby, you might have just wasted 20, 30 minutes of your time or maybe an hour or whatever you're baking. So most people feel like, well, if I'm going for that, no sugar thing, and it's pretty natural. I mean, look around the store here. Everything's in a bottle, right? I mean, it's as close to the way God created it as possible is our motto here. So plants have extracts, essential oils, floral essence. I mean, there's so many different parts of the plant that we can bottle and extract. And if you find a good company, we like Sweet Leaf. And Vaughn, maybe you could grab a sample of the powdered and a sample of the liquid and just bring it up here for me so I could just show that. And so, so basically they're processed in a way that's as minimal as possible. And the Sweet Leaf, they use basically non-genetically modified anything. Their flavors are not any kind of weird things. If you go on their website, they're really clean company, and I really like them. So you have two choices. You can use either a liquid or you can use a powder. Hannah, would you grab me Vaughn is getting it. Okay, great. I'm just gonna show you guys so you can get a visual for it. I should have had these up here earlier. So this is your liquid, and it can come in different flavors. You can get anything from vanilla, berry, toffee. Our favorites are usually toffee and vanilla and berry, but you can get it lemon and orange. I mean, they're just coming out with all kinds of flavors. And then this is just your powdered stevia. And these are packets that you can just put in your purse or carry with you. You can also get, sometimes we don't carry it, but you can get a larger container that you can just use as a little scoop. When I think about adding stevia into a recipe and I'm deciding between a liquid or a powder, I tend to use liquids with liquids. That kind of keeps it simple for me. So if I'm going to make almond milk at home or coconut milk, or I'm making tea or some type of real liquidy pudding or something, I'll usually just go with my liquid, and then I'll usually either use a flavor that complements what I'm using or just use plain if I don't want to have any flavor. If I'm going to go into like a baking, so today the brownies, we use the powdered form. I just feel like the powder sometimes doesn't add as more liquid to your baking, because sometimes you're kind of toying with how do I manage to substitute, when you're talking about a half a cup of honey or a half a cup of sugar, how do I play with stevia? Because the quantity you're using is like 1/8 of a teaspoon to 1/4 of a teaspoon, right? So we'll get into the specifics on that in a minute. But so I just kind of wanted to give you sometimes the only difference with the liquid is if I'm doing a sauce, I tend to go with the powder form, because for me, if I'm doing a curry or a spaghetti sauce and I just want a little touch of sweet, I feel like the powder just kind of helps with the sauce, keeps it thickening and keeps it from kind of getting too liquidy, because usually I'm trying to create a more condensed sauce instead of something that just keeps getting more liquidy. So those are just some little pointers on that. The flavor of stevia is definitely acquired. It's a very different flavor from your sugar or your maple syrup or your honey. But what we have found, and Summer has noticed this quite a bit, is that if you complement stevia with another natural sweetener, you honestly can usually cancel the flavor of the stevia out. So one of the best ways to do that is using fruit and stevia together. So if anybody tried the raspberry bars, they actually were just lime juice and stevia and raspberries and stevia. There was no additional sugar. And so that is extremely, that one recipe is like, the sugar count on that is so low, because we didn't even use dates in the crust. I used just a pinch of stevia in the crust. So we'll talk about that too. And you should have those recipes in your packets as well. The only thing that might not be on there is the substitutions, but I'll talk you through those. So a couple just tips that I have down here is that when you're using the stevia, sometimes it's good to hide the flavor with other flavors. So if vanilla extract's in your recipe, bump up your vanilla extract. Or if you're using lemon zest or lemon juice, bump those flavors up, because that will help mask. So if you're looking at a recipe and you're like, boy, I want to substitute stevia, look at what other flavors are in there, what other spices in there, cinnamon, nutmeg, cacao. Those will help hide. So bring in your flavor, and then that'll help also eliminate some of that stevia flavor. And I always suggest starting slow, because once you go, you can't take it back, right? And I've done that too many times in the kitchen where I'm trying to hurry and I'm like, oh, let's just get it done. And then I'm like, oh, I just paid for that. So I always start with 1/8 of a teaspoon with the powder. And then I always start with either a few drops if I'm just doing a small cup, or if I have a larger quantity, I sometimes will just start with a full dropper. The liquid I find goes a little bit, you can be a little more liberal with liquid. Powder, whew, that is strong stuff, so you really don't need much. So today, if you look at, I can tell you a little bit about how I substituted. If you look at your recipes, you can look at the walnut crust for a minute. And you'll see in the walnut crust that you've got walnuts, coconut flakes, dates, and sea salt. That's the standard recipe that we use in our recipe book, and that's the basic recipe. But when I wanted to create a sugar-free version, all I did was use a pinch of powdered stevia in the whole batch, and then instead of the dates, I used coconut oil. So if you want to provide the sticky, because the maple syrup or the dates would bring you a stickiness of binding, choose a fat. Choose coconut oil, butter, or whatever to give you the bulk, but then use the pinch of stevia for the flavor. So those are some ideas. For the raspberry lime cheesecake bar, you can look at that recipe. We basically, instead of maple syrup, we used the liquid stevia in that for both the filling and the topping. Since it was more of a pudding texture, we went with the liquid. And then in the peppermint brownies, I also did the powdered stevia in the base. And for the frosting, I went back to the liquid. Like I said, I like to use the liquids whenever I'm doing a pudding or something like that. So there's some amounts on there that kind of give you an idea. But it's really hard. I couldn't give you a chart today to say, for every ½ cup of maple syrup, use this much stevia. It just doesn't work that way. For one, your taste is different than my taste. And two, it depends on what else is in the recipe. Is there vanilla extract in there? Is there eggs in there? Is there fat in there? Things are gonna change how much you taste your stevia. So you don't wanna just kind of assume there's a standard out there and just go with it. I would always start small, and then I would just increase slowly. And I think the best way to introduce stevia into your family's diet is to take your favorite recipe and cut the sugar in half, and then add a little stevia. And then you have half the amount of sugar in your recipe, and then you just can kind of start playing with stevia, getting used to it, deciding, do I like the powder, do I like the liquid, and just start to kind of, get your hands into the concept of creating something with stevia instead of just going, cold turkey, no sugar and all stevia, and everybody's like, Mom, we don't want to eat it. That's frustrating as a mom, I know. So today I'm going to demonstrate a couple recipes for you, just two. I'm going to show you a basic pie crust, and this is actually in our cookbook. And it's really honestly a really versatile crust because you can cook it or you can use it raw, which who doesn't love that, right? It's like the same recipe. It's like great. So we're going to just go through that real quick. And so we talked about, how starches are also sugars, right? So this doesn't use any grain. It's basically just nuts and fat and a little sugar. So we're going to use walnuts as the base. A lot of people talk about soaking nuts and seeds. Some of the higher fat nuts you don't necessarily need to soak. So that would include macadamia nuts, cashews, walnuts. The only reason we do soak cashews when we use them in recipes is just for texture. It's not necessarily for sprouting them. If you're going to eat almonds, I highly recommend you soak them overnight because that helps to break them down and make them more digestible. So we've got 1.5 cups of walnuts. We have 1/2 cup of coconut flakes. We're going to do this. This is 6-pitted medjool dates. So medjool dates are different than, there's a couple different Diglett dates. Have anybody seen those? You can get those a lot. They're a little less expensive than medjool. But when you're doing this recipe, I recommend using the medjool because they're stickier and you're looking for something to help bind your crust. The Digletts you might have to use more, and I'm not sure if I'm even saying that right. Diglett, I'm not sure. All right, so we've got 6 dates, and then we have 1/4 teaspoon of sea salt. And then we're gonna blend. So who's made a pie crust before that takes this long? It's like the best. So I'm basically trying to get everything really combined, and I'll go till I feel like it's a little stickier. That looks pretty good. So what I'm looking for when I make this crust is, does it stick together if I squeeze it? So it is. So it's pretty much at that point where I think I'm ready to use it. I could go maybe a little bit longer, but I think it's fine. So I'm going to take my pie pan, and this crust works really nice for a 9-inch pie pan or any 2-quart casserole dish. So you could do that as well if you wanted to, do like squares or something instead of a pie, and that'd be fine too. And then I'm going to grease it really well with coconut oil. Because it's nuts, it's not going to be as gentle on baking, so you really want to have it really well greased. And then sometimes if your oven's a hot oven, you can even set this on aluminum foil in the oven, and that helps the bottom from burning. But you can still bake this. We made our pumpkin pie in this, and it comes out super delicious. It almost tastes like a graham cracker crust, and it's kind of crumbly like that. So it really was nice for bars. I think that's actually what we might do for the holiday party. If you guys come back, we'll do some pumpkin bars for you on the walnut crust, and it's super yum. So I greased that really well, and then I'm just going to take my crust and I'm going to dump it right into my pie pan. And this is kind of fun because, sometimes getting kids involved in the kitchen, it's always hard to find things for them to do. Sometimes it's like, not going to destroy your meal. But, my 4-year-old can press a crust if I help her kind of walk through it. She's really excited about being in the kitchen, which makes me excited, but sometimes it's a challenge to be efficient, right? So I have to kind of balance my efficiency with kindness, as you all our moms know. So I'm just going to press this in, and what I'm looking for is just a nice smooth consistency all around. I'm going to get it as kind of like an even thickness as much as I can, and it's just about a little bit of muscle. And so you guys have the recipe, I think, on your thing, but basically you could fill this with like a raw pie. So the raspberry cheesecake was a raw pie, and it just basically went in the fridge. You could have also frozen it if you wanted it to be firmer and more cold, but we just refrigerated it for you guys today. And what I do is I like to set this because of the it just needs kind of, I like to set it by putting it in the fridge or the freezer for just 10 minutes, and that just kind of gets it good and hard, and that way when you put your next layer in, you're not fighting the crumbs of the walnuts. All right, I feel like that's pretty good. I mean, I could keep smashing that perfectly. And then sometimes if you want to even grease it with a little bit of coconut oil on top, you can, if you're really depending on what you're going to be filling it with. So, voila. I mean, a 5-minute crust that you can use for anything. I mean, I necessarily wouldn't use this for like apple pies that are super soupy. But what you could do is you could put your apple pie in and then put this on top, or do it in a casserole dish like that. So it could be a top crust as well. If you're going to do it as a top crust, I would highly recommend covering with foil in the oven. And then if you just want to brown the top, then just take the foil off for the last few minutes. Does that sound good? Mm-hmm. Awesome. So you have your pie crust. So the next recipe I'm going to just demo for you is actually a fun one that it's kind of my partial because I'm a mom and you're always looking for things to do with your kids in the kitchen. And this is an option for those who want to do Christmas cookies, but you're looking to steer away from your, traditional white sugar cookie, right? So this is the, if you want to look at the lemon cashew cookie, that's what you guys had when you walked in today. So I did not soak these cashews. In a lot of the recipes in our cookbook, we soak the cashews. And like I said, it's not necessarily for sprouting and soaking and enzymes. Cashews don't necessarily need that because they're higher fat in content. And honestly, they're not really technically raw when you buy them in the stores because they've been heated to get out of their shells. So the reason we soak is for texture. But I didn't want to make a pudding out of this. I wanted it to be a cookie. So I didn't want to add any additional water. So this is actually, I think, the only recipe I don't think we soaked the cashews. All the others did. So 2 cups of cashews. This is 2 cups of fine, really fine coconut flakes. And if you don't have fine coconut flakes, you can always grind them in your coffee grinder to make them a little finer, or you can put them in a food processor, or if you have a Vitamix that has the flour attachment, like the grain attachment, you can blend them in there and it'll make it really fine like a flour. But I usually just buy them super fine because I use them so much that's it's just easier for me. So we're going to do the cashews, the coconut flakes. We're going to put a little sea salt in there, 1/4 teaspoon. I love this Himalayan pink salt. And this is the zest it's 2 tablespoons of lemon zest. And I think we used two lemons to get that. So I kind of have all my dry ingredients in there, right? Cashews, coconut flakes, sea salt, and lemon zest. And we're going to pulse that together. And, that's just kind of a standard thing when you're baking. Usually you put all your dry ingredients together, all your wet ingredients, and then add your wet ingredients into your dry. So I just kind of created my flour. So for those of you who are doing your regular cooking, it's just a fine, nice flour. It's real fluffy. And so now I'm going to create my wet base to add to my dry base. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the maple syrup. You could also use a different liquid sweetener. You could totally go with honey. You could do liquid stevia. But then you might, if you see in the recipe there's coconut oil in there, you might find that you need a little bit more coconut oil or something just to kind of sub that out. But definitely feel free to substitute out your stevia. So I've got my 8 tablespoons of maple syrup. And this batch, I think we say that it yields 36 cookies, but those are large cookies. We made probably, 80?
Oh, over 100.
Of those little teeny ones, the stars, I mean, well over 100. So you can get a lot of cookies out of this. It's not just 30. Those are 36 like gingerbread men size. All right, so we've got the sweetener. We've got lemon juice here. This is our 3 tablespoons of lemon juice, which came out of about, 1 to 2 lemons, depending on your size of your lemon. And then we've got lemon juice, vanilla, and essential oil. Yum. All right, so vanilla extract. We're going to do 2 teaspoons. So 1 and 2. And for the essential oils, that's just totally your ball game. Some people love the flavor of lemon, and so you might go heavier. For our recipe that you guys tried today, I just used about 4 drops. The secret is getting only 4 and not getting 20, which is easy to do. All right, so I'm gonna combine all that. Do I have all my liquids? I got my maple syrup, lemon juice, vanilla, and lemon essential oil. So now we're gonna add this into the dry mix as it's going.
Coconut oil?
I'm gonna do that at the end. Just because coconut oil, so that's a good little comment there. Coconut oil is liquid at kind of a warm temperature. So you'll notice I have my coconut oil sitting in a kind of little warm water bath, and that keeps it liquid. As soon as it touches anything cold, it's gonna start to, it's a saturated fat. It's gonna start to get hard again. So I don't really wanna add it to my liquids right now because I want it to stay super runny. If I added it to this, the maple syrup and the lemon juice are a little bit on the cold side. It just might make it harder to blend. And you'll see how the coconut oil kind of emulsifies everything at the very end. So we're gonna run this. Help it out and scrape down the sides just a little bit. Get that in there. So we're getting stickier, and the coconut oil is gonna do the final step here. And once you see the coconut oil get in, it'll just look like straight cookie batter. Stir here. So it's getting pretty sticky. We're getting closer. We're really close. I feel like I just want it to get a little bit more, but we're pretty close here. I mean, it's pretty sticky, but I want it to kind of ball up on me. I'm looking for it to ball up just a little bit longer. Oh, you can do it. There we go. Alrighty, I think it's pretty good. So what we've got is our cookie dough in here. Sometimes it kind of balls up and just starts spinning around like a big ball in there, but it didn't do that today. But I think it's pretty good. But it is sticky and it is like a nice big pile of dough. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scoop out just a nice ball of it. So what I have here is my cutting board. I dusted with almond flour and some fine coconut flakes, and you could use either. You just want to create a dry surface that's not going to be too sticky for you. What you're going to do is you're just going to create like a little ball of dough. And I sometimes roll it a little bit first just to kind of get it. And you could do two things here. You could take a little smidgen off. You could roll it in your hands. And you could bake it just like that. It's super simple. You get fancy. If you want to get the kids involved and do something fun, dust some cutting boards from. Get a little roller out. And that's all you're going to do. You're just going to keep it nice and dry so that you're not getting, you know, too sticky. And again, this is just, I actually just ground up some coconut flakes and some almond flour in my coffee grinder. No special measurements. I'm just looking to have some kind of flour replacement for rolling. And you can thicken it out. You know, you can do them thicker or thinner. Totally up to you. You can do gingerbread men. You can do stars, snowflakes. I don't know what other shapes are out there, but I just have a real simple little star here. So that's it. And you're just going to take your little cookie and pop it onto your baking dish and just go to town. Now you have a Christmas cookie. Yay!
Who grew up making sugar cookies with their family at home?
Yeah. So you know, I feel like I couldn't do that with my kids. To be very honest, I couldn't pick a batch of sugar cookie mix and bring it home. I just couldn't. My I don't know, conviction. Is that a good word? It's just too high. I'm not going to give that to my little girls and then yell at them for an hour because they're misbehaving. You know, it's like, what a double standard that is. So I just, I feel good about doing this with my girls, you know, because really if you do this whole batch and you only used 8 tablespoons of, you know, not, maybe that does sound like a lot, 8 tablespoons, but 8 tablespoons dispersed between all those cookies, and how many are they going to eat? And it's just the fun of doing it together and them creating something, and then you're creating a recipe for your family. So this is just one. There's a lot of other variations out there that you can do for Christmas cookies. This is just one of many. If you wanted to frost them, so after you bake them, take them out and you can cool them down in the refrigerator. We have a cashew cream cheese frosting that's coming out in our cookbook, which would be a great option to add on to that. And then you could put little raisins in there to make smiley faces. And then basically chill that, and then you've got a Christmas cookie. So, yeah, I'll take some questions.
With this dough, have you tried freezing it?
Yeah, we actually have. For the 1-year anniversary that we had in May, I don't know if you came to that, but I actually did over like 200 or 300 of these lemon cashew cookies, but I baked them and then I froze them. But I absolutely think you could freeze the batter first and then defrost them and then bake them. But I usually prefer to bake and then freeze, because then the work's done. And you never know what it's going to look like coming out of the freezer, right? What your dough's going to feel like. But I feel like one of the nice things about doing raw balls, raw pies, a lot of these nuts just freeze really well. Nuts and fat, they handle the freezer. They don't get freezer burn like, you know, sometimes like a pie crust, if you're using a standard pie crust, they kind of have that freezer burn sometimes. I feel like nuts freeze great. And so when we do big events, sometimes we'll do prep, a couple week ahead of time. And then,
balls.
and then we just put them in our deep freeze and we have them defrosted like a couple days before the event, and they're just as good as freshly made. Yeah, anybody else have questions?
Have you ever tried using almond flavoring instead of vanilla in with that lemon?
I haven't particularly done that, but I have had some almond flavored cookies once from a friend, and I think it'd be a great option.
I have another question. Go ahead.
I was wondering, how do you decide which nut to use for which recipe? Like almonds and the pie crust and cashews, and I know there's like almond flour that people use too.
Yeah.
How do you pick?
Repeat the question.
Okay, so the question is, how do I choose which nut that I'm going to use in my recipe? And a lot of times I just start with the idea of what flavoring I'm going for. So cashews take on the flavor of whatever you're making. So if I'm looking to have something that tastes like something not a nut, if I'm thinking I want it to taste like cheesecake and I want it lemony or raspberry, or I want to have another flavor besides a nut flavor, then I usually go with cashews because they're pretty, the palate on cashews, once you soak them, it kind of just loses its flavor, and then it takes on whatever the flavor of whatever you're using. Now, if I'm looking to create a crust, a lot of times I want that nut flavor, and then I might choose between walnuts or pecans, depending on what I'm pairing it with. So walnuts are usually a pretty standard, they kind of blend with most recipes. Pecans are a little bit stronger. So in our recipe book, we made a stuffed apple with dates and pecans, but I wanted that strong pecan flavor because I wanted to make it more of that warmth, apple pie feeling, and I just felt the pecans brought the apple out instead of the walnuts. So I just think it's a personal taste when it comes to choosing that, but when it comes to deciding on what your recipe is, I would think, do I want a nut flavor, do I want it just plain? And then that's where you can kind of go from there. Macadamias can also kind of pull off what cashews can, but they still have a little bit stronger nut flavor.
What about almonds? Are they pretty neutral?
I would say almonds are still nutty unless you blanch them, and if you're making your own, it's a lot of time to blanch. Blanching almonds takes, tossing them in hot water real quick for a few minutes,
You can buy
taking them
blanched
out.
almond flour.
You can buy blanched almond flour, but if you actually want to use the nut, you would have to blanch them yourself. It's really, you could buy blanched nuts, but they're not as fresh usually. So you're going to get a nutty flavor, especially just because of the coating on the almond. Yeah.
How about hazelnut crust?
Hazelnut crust, that would be a great option. I think that's a wonderful, I would love to experiment with hazelnut. Yeah, a lot of people, especially around the holiday season, that would be a really good option. So hazelnut crust was a fun alternative to
Esther,
someone suggested. Esther?
In the brownies, it calls for a roasted beet.
Yes.
I've never roasted a beet. I always boil them. So,
Yes.
Do you roast the beet with the skin on?
Yes.
And
So,
how long?
okay, the question is if in one of the recipes today we had beets in the brownies. So beets, believe it or not, are great to bake with. They bring in so much moisture and they have a sweetness to themselves, but they're not necessarily, a sugar they have some natural sugar, but they're not gonna be like a banana or a date. So how I cook what I do to prepare my beets is I smother them with olive oil. I rub them with sea salt a little bit because I just love sea salt, and I bake them in the oven at 425 degrees for an hour until they pierce with a fork. And I just do it right on a baking sheet. I don't use tin foil. I don't wrap them in anything. I just feel like the olive oil, or you could use coconut oil or whatever oil you want, but just to prevent the beet skin from burning at the high temperature. And then as soon as they're tender, I take them out of the oven and I just slice them up. And literally my kids eat them like candy. So I have to, if I'm making them for a recipe, I have to always roast twice the amount
Great on
because
salads, great for snacks.
my kids just pound them. And
Skin
so
them off real easy when they're baked?
when you
Oh,
roast
yeah.
them like that, the skin just peels right off.
And the skin's really yummy.
But actually we like the skin, so we tend to leave the skin on them. Yeah.
What do you usually use, the coconut or the olive oil?
I tend to use the olive oil when I'm doing the beets just because the flavor of the coconut oil
Too strong.
is a little bit strong for the flavor of the beet. But I think the olive oil, some people don't like using olive oil at high temperatures. For me, once in a blue moon, I think it's okay. So.
When you said for roasting the beet, is it okay to use aluminum foil, or is there like a concern with baking stuff?
Yeah, a lot of people are concerned about aluminum toxicity. And unless you're, so like baking in aluminum pans and frying in aluminum pans, if you're scratching the surface, you're bringing aluminum into the food, absolutely. Baking is a little bit more safe because you're either just kind of covering it. I don't believe, from my understanding, that the aluminum releases just from being in a high temperature. It stays within the foil. So unless you're scratching the aluminum and drawing it into the food, which happens when you cook with aluminum or saute with aluminum, which is why we really recommend going into ceramics. Even stainless steel leaches into your food. Yeah, so you want to get either the surgical stainless steel, which doesn't leach into your food, or the ceramics if you're concerned about toxicity with your cookware. They are expensive, so you do want to take time bringing that into your arsenal. We've switched to ceramic, and we're getting there slowly. And stoneware, we love stoneware, which is what this is. This is, you can find these on pretty much anywhere now.
Stoneware is really nice.
Stoneware is great, yeah. Question in the back.
I was wondering, you put the 2 cups of finely shredded and sweetened coconut in. What would be the difference in using flour? Coconut flour.
So the difference between using coconut flour and coconut flakes is tremendous. Coconut flour is super heavy and dense and and very absorbent, and the flavor is extremely, I think, flat. Where coconut flakes have a lot more, they have a little more hydration to them, and they carry, so I should have repeated the question.
Coconutty.
What was the difference between coconut flour versus coconut flakes? I honestly don't use coconut flour rarely in my recipes. If I'm using something, I'll almost always use fine coconut flakes because of the hydration that the coconut flakes provide. I don't feel like coconut flour is easy to bake with. I feel like it knocks out all your moisture, and a lot of times I'm doing recipes with stevia or things that, I'm trying to bring moisture into my recipe, not take it out. And so that's why coconut flour I typically tend to avoid. But absolutely, coconut flour, it'd be fine to use. You just may have to tweak the recipe to bring in more liquid. You might have to tweak the recipe a little bit to bring in more liquid if you did use coconut flour, because you would lose a lot of the hydration. That's okay.
So I was wondering, you said there was a flour, and he started talking that you used to roll the dough out with.
Yes. Yeah, so the question was, what did I use to roll the dough? So I used actually a combination of almond flour, just fine blanched almond flour. And I had that, and I had coconut flakes, and I just thought it would be fun to mix the two. Honestly, you could have just used coconut flakes, or you could have just used almond flour. The key is that it needs to be really fine, kind of flour consistency. So I tend to put whatever I'm using in, like, if I don't feel it's fine enough, I put it in a small little coffee grinder. We have a coffee grinder at home. We don't drink coffee, but I use it for everything else. So just buzz it a few minutes, and you've got a nice fine flour that you could use either out of the coconut flakes or out of the almond flour.
Okay, I have one more question.
Yeah.
Then where do you sell the fine coconut
You-
shreds, or where do you buy all
That's a great question. So the question is, do we sell the fine coconut shreds? And we presently don't, but I buy them because through Vaughn, because he has an account with a company that Ultimate Superfoods. I will say that fine is hard to find. And so as we expand, that might be something to consider offering.
Could order it on the next order. We can get it easy.
Yeah, or if you ever want it from us, we can get it
Yeah.
through Ultimate Superfoods. It's extremely fine, but I love it because it's basically like a flour, but it's not as dry. And so, but as we expand out into that side, this is going to open up into more product area. And so we could potentially have some bulk items that you can't get. And so anytime you want something, let us know, and we'll write it down in the customer request book. If we don't carry it, we definitely would like to bring it in for you. So.
Would it work in a bullet?
So the question is, would I make yes, I think if you were, instead of using a coffee grinder to make your coconut flakes fine, you could totally try it in a bullet, because bullets tend to be pretty good at getting things small. It might be hard to do in maybe other not high blenders, but I think a bullet or a Vitamix that has the grain attachment would be good.
This might be more of a question for Vaughn.
Mhm.
Can you comment on, like, I think, aren't there sugars added to most dried fruits? Like, I see dried fruits used a lot as sweeteners in sugar-free recipes,
Mhm.
but are they not processed with, like, sugar, like processed sugar?
So cranberries and
Right, a lot of them are.
cranberries and cherries sometimes are processed with sugar. And nowadays you can find some that are processed. Sorry, the question is, I always forget to repeat the question. The question is for the camera and everybody else, is can are dried fruits usually found dried with sugar on them? And the question is yes, they can be. The answer is yes. You can find sometimes raisins usually are dried without sugar. Things like apricots and mangoes, but a lot of times you want to read the label because many dried fruits are dried with sugar. And
Cranberries almost always are because they're so tart.
yeah, cranberries, cherries.
Yeah.
But I am finding now that you can usually look for, in the natural health food stores at least, apple juice sweetened cranberries or apple juice sweetened, cherries or things like that, which is a nice alternative to the being sweetened with just your regular cane sugar.
Dates? Are dates?
Dates are not sweetened, and dates are actually not even dried. Dates are the real
Dates are
deal.
just dates. That's how they come off the tree.
Yeah,
like that.
believe it or not. I always thought they were a dried fruit, and then I realized through Vaughn or some friend of ours that we were talking about dates, and they're like, they're not a dried fruit. And we're like, what? My whole life. I thought dates were dried. No. But, which makes me feel better about it, because that means that's how God made it, right? So, I like using dates. They give the sticky. Yeah, they give the sticky if you need it. Yes.
Do you have any recipes in your new cookbook using almond flour? I have a lot at home. I need to use that.
The question is, do we have any recipes in our cookbook using almond flour? And we have it throughout the book a couple times. We don't use a ton of it. The cookbook probably calls more for nuts in whole form, but definitely there are some almond flour. Like the brownies today had almond flour in the base. Yeah, they had a combination of oat and almond flour, but you could have done those brownies with all almond flour.
Didn't you say in the recipe almond meal?
Almond flour, almond meal, pretty interchangeable.
Almond meal is not like the blanched almond flour.
Yeah, it should. I don't know. I'll have to look at what the recipe says, but we use blanched almond flour. Some people just call it almond meal.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty similar, but yeah, you want to use the blanched. That gives you a little bit lighter texture. You can get away with using the non-blanched almond flour. It just is a little bit denser, but hey, for a brownie, that might work great.
At wholesale grocers, or what's the name of that place? Natural Grocers? You can get a big bag of it for half the price of the Whole Foods.
Yes, definitely shop around for your flours, because some places are, and I have to say, Costco's coming out with quite a bit of organic right now, and especially over the holidays, we were able to get a lot of our stuff there for bulk in organic and good form. So that's been kind of a fun treat for us going there.
It is.
Yeah.
All right.
Any other
You're all
questions?
welcome to hang out.
One more question in the corner.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
When I was very young, I found that I was allergic to sulfur, so I used to watch all the dried fruits because that used to be the most common thread,
Yeah.
and I can get in trouble with it. So I would
Absolutely.
recommend people really watch that there's not sulfur in their dried fruit.
Yeah, so the comment is that a lot of times if you're looking at dried fruit, sulfur dioxide is another way that they use to preserve the fruits. And so you can look at packages and read in the back, and it'll say if it contains sulfur dioxide or not. And a lot of times you can find places that don't use the sulfur, so absolutely avoid that if you can.
So we actually have lots of extra desserts. So if anybody wants one on the way out or wants to bring one to a family member, please feel free to do that. And if you guys need anything, we always usually do 10% off on class days. So if you guys want anything, it's 10% off. And then I guess our next event would be not this Friday, but next Friday, the Christmas party.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for coming out, guys.
Yay.
Definitely.